Thank you for joining this fourth and final part of the Get Real series as we ask the question, why are young people leaving the church? So far, we've considered disillusionment, deconstruction, and disengagement as some factors which play into a departure of millennials and Gen Z from our churches. Now, these 3 Ds, if you will, may not necessarily happen in this order, and a young person may not articulate, I'm disengaged by my faith, or I'm feeling disillusioned, or I'm deconstructing my faith. But as we listen to their questions and objections, traits of these processes become clear. To a certain extent, these 3 Ds are not detrimental to faith in and of themselves, because we all go through seasons of refining and growing in our relationship with God. It is healthy to ask questions, a sign of maturity in wanting to know more. But for some, the end result is sadly to land in a place where Christianity is rejected altogether. And so today, we are on to the final D, very much linked to deconstruction. This is decolonization. Now, decolonization draws upon the work of academics like Walter Mignolo, which advocates delinking away from a colonial epistemology, ways of thinking and forms of knowledge, which ultimately privilege largely white Western culture. One example of decolonization in popular culture is campaigning for changes to the national curriculum in order to include more Black history. Within the Christian context, the decolonizing of faith can include asking questions like, is Christianity the white man's religion? Who did Black people worship before slavery? And why is African spirituality demonized? Of the 4 Ds that I have been presenting over this series, this one is particularly important to me, as I have experienced times of questions and internal struggle. And I've also been accused of a type of cognitive dissonance which continues to blindly worship a white God who is ultimately my oppressor. Now, this language sounds really strong, but the sentiments behind it are real and tangible within the Black community. Unfortunately, these questions and concerns can sometimes be dismissed by a well-intentioned pietism within the Black majority church, which can be reluctant to address racial injustice. Likewise, within white majority church spaces, objections to faith based on historical or present-day racial injustice can be dismissed as not a gospel issue, or examples of the so-called threat of critical race theory infiltrating the church. Even as I say these words, there is likely to be some discomfort with the very notion of a Black or white majority church. Surely this kind of thinking creates divisions. For example, in an ill-advised social media conversation, I was told there is no such thing as the Black church. I was told there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ. That's from Galatians 3 and verse 28. However, arguments like this firstly show a lack of understanding in one of the main contributory factors for the emergence of the Black majority church in the UK. In an interview with Justin Briley on The Unbelievable Show, Dr. Joe Aldred explains how the Black majority church was born in the UK partly because Caribbean delegates or evangelists were being sent to the UK. But there are also many cases in which the Windrush generation, many of whom were Christians, were rejected from the established church upon their arrival in the UK. An example of this very common testimony is the Reverend Carmel Jones, pioneer of the Pentecostal Credit Union, who received an apology from St. Paul's, Clapham in 2020. In response to being rejected, these Black Caribbean Christians started home prayer meetings, house church meetings. They rented halls and then eventually bought their own church buildings to worship God. Demonstrating a resilient spirit, Black Christians of the Windrush generation formed their own churches. In his book, Reading While Black, Esau Macaulay writes about a similar story in the American context. He writes about the miracle of the Black church, which formed in spite of slavery and racism. This shows us that there is something about what happens to the human heart when we encounter Jesus. despite persecution or despite rejection from the wider society. So whilst the invitation of Christianity is indeed for everyone, as we read in Galatians 3 verse 28, the sin of racism prevents this ultimate, beautiful eschatological vision from being realized in our churches. So how do I, as a Black Christian, make sense of my faith? How might decolonizing my faith help rather than hinder my relationship with God? When I hear that Christianity is the white man's religion, I recall the legacy of my ancestors who were incisive and profound in their ability to distinguish between the Christianity of enslavers and true relationship with God. As we dismantle harmful, racist ideas espoused by toxic theology, this should not mean the erasure of our ancestors who were committed Christians and powerful activists, not brainwashed believers. And to do so is to somewhat indulge in chronological snobbery and actually buy into the lie of white supremacy. See, our denunciation of racism shouldn't mean the erasing of robust, intellectual and reasoned thinking of our ancestors who were instrumental in calling out the hypocrisy of slaveholders. Mary Prince, Olaudah Equiano, Frederick Douglass are examples of Black thinkers who were far from brainwashed. And looking further back still, we can honour the lives of martyrs like Perpetua and Felicity, African women who were killed for their faith. And not to mention the early church fathers such as Origen, Athanasius, Augustine and Cyprian, who were North African and crucial shapers of theology, but sadly whitewashed by Christian art. As Dr. Vince Bantu reminds us in his book, A Multitude of All Peoples, Christianity is not becoming a global religion. It has always been a global religion. Therefore, decolonization of one's faith does not need to result in the abandoning of it. Rather, telling the full story of the diverse roots and growth of Christianity reveals to us more deeply the God who does not erase but celebrates ethnic diversity. As Revelation 7 verse 9 tells us, around God's throne there will be multitudes from every nation, tribe, people and language.